The automobile industry is a cradle of innovation and creativity, and thus our cars have come a long way in such a short period of time. But not all ideas are worthy of sticking out for so long. So here's a top 10 list of failed car innovations.
Side-mounted flamethrowers on a car might seem like a movie prop from a James Bond film, right? And possibly just a figment of imagination for most people. But in South Africa, where crime, violence and destruction were rampant, they also experimented with this. Many optional side-mounted flamethrowers are also used somewhere else on African continent to scare wildlife animals away from cars, notably large safari animals like the rhinos that are fond of charging vehicles. German automaker BMW actually developed an infamous luxury car equipment with flamethrowers. They called it the Blaster. Of course, the legality of developing these types of vehicles were questioned given that most militaries around the world no longer use flamethrowers as a weapon, as they are considered to be too barbaric and insane. In 2013, the Fiat 500L featured an espresso machine in its center console. The concept of in-car coffee makers seemed intriguing at first. For coffee enthusiasts, the idea of having a freshly brewed cup of latte in your fingertips during long day drive was undeniably appealing. It promised to keep drivers alert and energized on the road, especially during long journeys or early morning commutes. Car manufacturers always look out for innovative features to set in their vehicles to give them a better try. While the idea of brewing a fresh cup of coffee in your car may seem appealing, the real-life world challenges, distractions, and safety hazards presents made it an impractical and often too dangerous concept. Maintaining the right temperature for brewing coffee and keeping it hot without compromising the safety was a technical challenge. But then, the most significant concern was safety. Brewing coffee in a moving vehicle introduced a new layer of risk. The potential for hot fluids to spill on the driver or passengers was a grave concern. The aromas could also be distracting, leading to decreased concentration on the road. Automakers in the 1950s and 60s were talking about developing nuclear fission engines in cars. The Ford Motor Company went so far as to develop a nuclear-powered concept car in 1958 known as the Ford Nucleon. The scale model showed a nuclear-powered car which might look and operate the same way. Many other automakers also experimented the idea of outfitting vehicles with nuclear engines. The idea of cars to be powered by a nuclear reactor mounted in the rear of the vehicle. Fortunately, nuclear-powered cars were deemed to be a wee bit dangerous and too expensive to develop and were later scrapped. However, the Ford Nucleon is available to see today at the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit, Michigan. In 1947, Cadillac developed a car that was equipped with a toilet in it. This innovation was developed to help Cadillac complete the feat of driving over 10,000 kilometers non-stop. And while it was a stunt, the idea of outfitting cars with toilets was hotly considered by major automakers in the late 1940s and 50s. But while the innovation worked in a concept car for Cadillac, it proved to be a horrendous work for most vehicles. Just finding a place for the toilet inside the car, along with a tank to store this excrement, was difficult. But then there were of course issues with splashing, spraying and messing, not to mention smells. In the end, it proved to be much easier for motorists to simply pull over a gas station and use the toilet than to squat in the back of a car. We've finally reached a state of technology where cars park for you. That's still something that feels very futuristic despite it being a feature in many cars today. If we rewind back almost 90 years, they were closer to the idea than you'd think. In 1930s, fifth wheel parking concept is a quite indigenous one, and to be honest, it's hard to see why it didn't become the norm, especially when you see the amount of marks on bumpers in major cities.
New cars getting bigger and parking spaces getting smaller. At Piedmont, California, an inventor has developed something to soothe the motorist's headache by putting the spare tire to work. He calls this device the park car and says it can be installed on any model.
It's a fairly simple idea, as a fifth wheel would push down from the rear of the car at sideways angle and you can swing the car around in the tightest of spaces. The only real downside we can think of is a tiny bit of scrubbing in the front wheels. Unfortunately, it never took off. Brooks Walker demonstrated his innovation in 1933 and the second attempt in the 1950s on a Cadillac, but that still resulted in the idea being brushed off as it was too expensive. An audio equipment company isn't the first thing that jumps to mind while developing a revolutionary suspension system, but spent a lot of time on the project and it was actually a technological success. When you watch the footage of electromagnetic suspension in action, it's actually quite incredible. The test car for the suspension was a Lexus LS 400 and it's a car known for its smooth ride. The luxury car suspension system does result in some body roll as you'd expect when the car is really put to some test in over bumps, corners and hard braking. However, when the Bose suspension system is fitted to the same model, the LS400 had absolutely zero body roll, not even a hint of it. The wheels seem to move as if it's completely independent from the chassis. The real party trick of the system is the ability to jump, although Bose said it wouldn't allow this feature in the final production model. The reason for the system's failing wasn't a technological one, but financial. The system was too expensive to install and quite heavy too. This technology is used by Bose today, but in the cushion seats for long distance truckers. The hype that surrounded the Citroen C3's arrival in 2002 was extraordinary. It claimed to deliver 5 different body styles in minutes, thanks to its canvas roof mounted on a pair of arches. You could have a comfortable 4-seater saloon with a roomy boot, and open-top leisure vehicle with full-length sunroof, a Targa-style semi-convertible with a roof mounted, a full convertible with arches taken off, and many other ways. Unfortunately, the execution was quite poor. The roof was extremely fiddly, the arches were a hefty 12 kgs each, and there was no room for them in the car, so when it suddenly started raining, it got wet. All in all, it was a massive failure for the company. Some innovations that didn't catch on are now remembered rather fondly, and a good example of that are the disappearing doors that featured on the BMW Z1 Roadster produced between 1989 and 1991. The two-seater, while very much ahead of its era, still looks pretty cool, and its undoubtable party trick was the doors slid vertically downward into the sill and the press of a button instead of opening in a conventional fashion. This is made possible by a mechanism that include electric motors in both the windows and the doors, rods that toothed in the rubber belt. Returning them to usual position was a simple case of tugging and door pull. This supposed to benefit easier access, but that was debatable given that you still had a fairly high still to step over. Indeed, it was hard to shake the impression that those were rather pointless. The Ford Pinto was a subcompact car introduced by Ford in 1971, with the primary focus on being affordable and fuel-efficient option for consumers. However, it became infamous due to the serious design flaw that made the vehicle prone to fires in the rear-end collisions. The root of the problem was with Ford Pintos was the fuel tank's location. Ford positioned the fuel tank in a vulnerable location just behind the rear axle, leaving it exposed for event of rear-end collisions. The design choice was made to save fuel costs and also allowed Ford to avoid expensive altercations to the car's structure. The design was fundamentally flawed from a safety perspective as it put lives of passengers at risk. When the Pinto memo became widely known, it caused public outrage and backlash against Ford. The company's actions were widely criticized as morally reprehensible, prioritizing profit over human lives. Ford eventually recalled the Pinto in 1978 after years of criticism and numerous lawsuits. However, by the end, damage was done and the Pinto had become a symbol of corporate negligence